So thank you all for joining me today for a look at Saturn and Aquarius. This will be roughly a 90-minute look at Saturn and Aquarius, what it means thematically, what it means for each of your signs and rising sign, and what we are working on over the next 2 years. But Saturn Aquarius did begin earlier this year. We had a little bit of a preview from March until July. So that sort of gave us an idea of what to expect. Let's see if I can make this bigger. That's better. So again, my name is Katie Sweetman. This is December 17th. No, it's not. It's December 19th. As I record this, it's December 17th when Saturn went into Aquarius. And this is Saturn Aquarius 2020 to 2023. I'm here in New York City. I live in Brooklyn, New York. I'm both a counseling astrologer and psychic medium. I know a lot of you are my clients, or a lot of you have watched previous webinars in the past. I started Empowering Astrology in 2010. It was to create something that was kind of the thing that I wanted to read. You know, how do we use astrology to better ourselves? And it's, you know, not reinventing the wheel here, but my view is like, how do we use astrology plus consciousness to live more soulful lives? So here's the rough agenda for today. Just, you know, if you're watching on the replay, of course, you can pause this. I will be sending out the slides to everyone so you can go back and refer to the slides on your own as needed. So let's do an introduction. So when I originally did this webinar, and I think a few of you actually signed up for the one that I did on March 12th, 2020. If you think back, March 12th, 2020 was right when the world was about to shift. In fact, it was in the midst of shifting. And one of the things that I said at the time was that when I recorded, or rather when I was preparing for the webinar, I wasn't, coronavirus or COVID-19 was not on my radar at all. And so one of the words that was being used, and of course still used, is social distancing. And I remember thinking at the time, wow, that's so Saturn and Aquarius. And of course, we'll go into why and how that's one of the ways in which Aquarius expresses itself. One of the things we also saw with the preview of Saturn and Aquarius from March to the 1st of July was a lot of themes around social justice, social change, social causes. So we got, we got our preview earlier this year on some of the themes that we are going to unpack throughout 2021 and 2022, all the way into the first few months of 2023. Aquarius is also social systems, and you know, Saturn as a planet, it rules 2 signs in astrology. It rules Capricorn. You know, Saturn just left Capricorn. Capricorn's an earth sign. It's the final earth sign. It's a sign that builds and constructs, but the other side of Saturn and Aquarius, is something about air. It's about society, it's about community, it's about science and social systems and these networks that we build. And even something like our highways or how we deliver things, these are all Aquarian themes. Aquarius has 2 sides, and something that we will go into. It's both connection. As an air sign, and for those who are new to astrology, a recap of the air signs are Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. So if Gemini is like that movement, it's information, it's ideas, then it's in Libra that we have this like necessary one-on-one, let's bounce things off of each other, let's weigh our options. Libra is the scales, which then brings us to Aquarius. And there's a lot of, potentially at least, a lot of wisdom in Aquarius. And this is a technical point. For those who know a little bit more astrology, Sagittarius is Aquarius's 11th sign. So we see a lot of this wisdom and intelligence has a possibility in Aquarius, but it's a sign that wants to connect on one level, but it's also a sign that wants to disconnect on its other level. And so we are going to be looking at technology over the next couple of years, both collectively on a personal level. You know, when the pandemic started or happened or began, everything moved online. We became distant, we became separated, yet ironically, we're able to connect more and more because the things that were more isolated by geography. I was having this conversation with a friend last night. So her husband is a poet and gets involved with these poetry community in New York, but now they just connect people all over the world. So there's like this double-edged sword that's happening with Aquarius, and how technology can both take us away from one another, but also bring us close in some ways. So Saturn is, when it goes into a sign, we have to live time, because astrology really is about the study of time. We have to live time through Saturn's archetype. We have to live time through Aquarius's archetype. So right now we are in Aquarius time. And Aquarius time is this look at systems and networks and the things that connect us and the things that divide us, and how Aquarius is one of the last signs of the zodiac. So when we get to the end of the zodiac, we're dealing with things that are more about humanity. It's more about society. It's something at a much bigger, broader level. It's not individual. It's not what did I have for lunch? It's not where did I go to the store? It's these kind of bigger, broader strokes in our life. And we must, anytime Saturn is in a sign, we have to take a look at that sign. You know, Saturn was in Capricorn from 2018 all the way up until December 17th, 2020. So we had to take a look at Capricorn. We had to take a look at our structures. We had to take a look at our governments and powers, and how we built things. And Pluto was there, of course. So it was a kind of a complicated, messy, heavy work that we all personally and collectively did over the last 3 years. Previous to that, Saturn was in Sagittarius. We had to look at Sagittarius, which is philosophy, faith, truth, meaning, religion, belief. So here are just some of your keywords for Saturn and Aquarius. It's systems, networks, connections, society, humanity, equity, justice, the future. Aquarius is very much a future-oriented sign. It's like looking ahead. Technology, science, intellect, and even consciousness. And I really believe that the zodiac is the wheel of life, meaning that in all of creation, everything has a place. Everything has a sign that it resonates with. So this idea that consciousness resonates with Aquarius on one side, but of course there's the other side of Aquarius, which is anti-consciousness. And so I think that this is a time that's trying to wake us up. It's trying to wake us up on a personal level, on a societal level, on a global level. So there are things that maybe over the next 2 years, they kind of confront what we believe. They confront how we see the world, and maybe they shake us. Maybe they shake us awake. Maybe they powerfully transform us. And that's how we sort of gain in our consciousness of ourselves and our consciousness of the world. And I think it's important, and we'll do this throughout the presentation, later in the presentation, to look at previous cycles of Saturn in Aquarius, because we need to kind of see the thread. We need to see the unifying theme. Saturn was, for example, last in Aquarius from 1991 until early 1994. Previous to that, it was 1961 to 1964. And then even going back into 1932, 1935. I mean, I won't go beyond that, but there are some of you that are either watching the replay or you're on the live webinar where you were live during previous cycles of Saturn and Aquarius. So you have more personal relationship with this time and with this archetype and what it meant back, whether it was the 1960s or even the 1990s. So each zodiac sign is going to experience this time differently because Saturn is in a different relationship with your sign. It's one of the archetypes, or sorry, not archetype, one of the metaphors that I use or will use throughout this, this webinar is that Saturn is just like a hand on the clock. It's pointing us towards a certain hour of our life. And so one of the things that we'll go through later when we go through what does this mean for each sign is like, where's the hand on the clock pointing right now? So here we are, part 2, Saturn, the Saturn hand on the clock. And something that I say over and over again, and I even think my friend Dylan's watching, you know, I told him like astrology is just time. It's just metaphoric time. It's symbolic time. It's how we live time. And you all have your own time. And this is symbolized by your birth chart. This exact moment that you're born, it gives you an energy. And this is an energy that you will live the entirety of your life. And you will live it through these different archetypical expressions of based on where the planets were when you were born. And so astrology helps us to understand how does time manifest itself through us. And as I was saying a few moments ago, we all have our own time. And I think sometimes when people come into my work, meaning they come into, you know, a client session with me, I think people sometimes are like, well, when is this going to happen? You know, when is that relationship going to happen? When is that career going to happen? And I think it's important that we all understand that we have our own time. It doesn't mean that we don't have free will. It doesn't mean that we don't make choices and how we live this time. But Saturn sort of reminds us of the time. And your time might be very different than your peer. This is why you look, you know, maybe you're in your 20s or your 30s or even your 40s, and you look at your peers and they are in very different places than you because they're living a different time. So I like to call Saturn the master timekeeper. It does teach us about time. It does teach us about how things unfold, and it sort of regulates us. There are things that, even though I was using the example of our peers and our peers living at different time, but Saturn does mark stages of development and personal milestones, whether it's age 7, age 14, age 21. These are Saturn ages because they're, you know, Saturn has a 29-year cycle. So if you divide that into 4, it's roughly 7 years. And we know that 7 years is important. You know, they call it the 7-year itch, or it takes 7 years for something to be expunged from your records financially, or other things. These kind of a couple examples that come to mind. But Saturn I think culturally we know Saturn, even though we don't realize that we're talking about Saturn. And there's the Saturn return, age 28, 29, which we'll talk about later, or, you know, age 58 if you're older, and how that does talk about how this is a time that we will all live at the same time, whether, you know, because we all, you know, are either you're not 21 or not 29 right now, but you will get there, hopefully. So you will have a rite of passage that we can measure. It's always going to be age 29. It's always going to be age 58, and then the quarters in between. This is the symbol that I'm showing on the screen right now is an image of the zodiac using Aries. It's called a natural chart. So Aries is rising in this chart. And in this chart, you kind of give you this idea of the Saturn hand is now pointing towards Aquarius. On the left side of the screen, there's a symbol in the upper left-hand corner of this wheel, these like squiggly lines. That's the symbol for Aquarius. And the symbol in the middle is the symbol for Saturn, this little H with the line running through the top. So depending on where Saturn is in your chart, it's like this is now your hour. You could have the Saturn hand on your clock pointing towards relationships. It could be pointing towards career. So this is what your time is now and what is going to be a major focus until March of 2023. This is something that, since I recorded the first webinar about this, something that I've been speaking more in my work with people, because it's a metaphor, this idea of the room, that people seem to really understand, because otherwise astrology can be very abstract. It can be hard to connect to all these figures, and there's so many moving parts, and it's like, what does this mean, Katie? And so imagine you have a house. This house has 12 rooms. This is a house that you live in your whole life. And each of these rooms, again, there are 12 in total, signify a different part of your life. And just like a regular house, it has a kitchen, it has a bathroom, it has a living room. These different rooms serve different roles. So Saturn has just left one room, the Capricorn room, which, depending on your sun sign, depending on your rising sign, is going to talk about a certain area of your life. And it's now gone into the next room. We'll talk about that in a second. And it kind of helps us to understand this presence, sitting in this space in your proverbial house, your astrology house, of which you have two houses. Unless you're born at sunrise, you have the house for your sun sign, and you have the house for your rising sign. So, for example, if you're an Aries, Saturn has just walked into the 11th room. Of course, the real terminology in astrology is the 11th house, but this idea that over the coming 2 years, and in a way you've already been in this space. So, from March 21st until July 1st, when Saturn dipped into Aquarius, Saturn went into the 11th room for Aries, or it went into the 10th for Taurus. And so these are the different rooms. And if you're watching on the live, or if you're watching on the replay, you can take note of what is your room. What is your area that Saturn is going to be in over the next 2 years until March of 2023? If you're Leo, it's relationships, Pisces, spirituality. So the 12th room, the last room of the house. And when I go through the sign by sign, look at the planets, or look at Saturn Aquarius, we'll go into more on what this means for you. Aquarius time. What does it mean to be in Aquarius time? And I should also note, and I will talk about this in a few moments, that we also had another big planet go into Aquarius. In fact, today, December 19th, as I record this, Jupiter has just gone into Aquarius. So we have two major hands on the clock pointing towards Aquarius. So this means that, especially in 2021, we're in Aquarius time. Aquarius is the 11th sign of the zodiac. It's the second to last. It deals with things that are much bigger than us. I was saying this a few moments ago, so just to kind of say it again, it's network, it's society, it's humanity, it's collective, it's social causes, social justice, social equity. And it's when you get to Aquarius, and this is when you take Aquarius in connection to Pisces, which is the sign that's next to it, you're starting to get into something that feels invisible. You could say that Aquarius is the fabric of humanity, especially if you pair it with Pisces. It's like this web, it's like this network, it's like this energy that connects all of us. And so Aquarius time means that over the next couple of years, we need to kind of see both sides of Aquarius. We need to see where we are connected and disconnected. Aquarius, like I said, with it's part of 3 air signs. Gemini is one of them, Libra is the other. We have to weigh both sides. We have to make choices, Gemini, weigh the options, Libra. Which side of Aquarius are we consciously and actively living? There's that word, consciously. Consciously means you're making a choice with full awareness versus making a choice that's unaware, instinctual, unconscious. So, or anti-consciousness, where you are actively going against yourself. You're actively knowingly doing something that you know is going to cause yourself or even cause other people harm. So we have to see over the next 2 years, like where are we with Aquarius? Are we separate? Are we disconnected? Are we connected? And it's not so simple as being like, all right, I'm going to be like the connected side of Aquarius. It's a work. It's in Saturn is in Aquarius. So this is our work over the next 2 years. And we saw this from March until July, not that it went away on July 1st, but social issues and equity are more important than ever during this time. And when we look at what was going on when Saturn was in the previous times it was in Aquarius, you'll see why. Why is it this time? Why is it now that we are having the conversations that we're having, that we are looking at ourselves and looking at our society and our communities in the way that we have been looking at them? And we're seeing this, of course, with the virus. We're seeing this with trying to come up with a vaccine or other things that are going to mitigate this. Science and technology are going to be a major theme over the next couple of years. Aquarius is the lab technician. Aquarius is the person with all the answers, all the information. There's intelligence in Aquarius. It's the scientist. It's one of its archetypes. So science and technology will be a major factor, and we'll see why that was a theme in the early 90s as well as the early 60s. This might be a little bit of a radical thought, but Aquarius is an air sign, meaning it's not visible, but it connects us in some way. It's connection, it's social connection. It's kind of this web. And if Aquarius or Saturn is a physical sign or physical planet, it's like kind of about manifestation. It's like the shape of our thoughts, the shape of our ideas, and how when we create something or we connect to something, we connect to a belief, we connect to a group, there's the non-physicality of it, there's the shape of it as an idea. And we all have these ideas that we nourish and it could be a negative shape. It could be something like it's a belief about ourselves, like, this can only happen. Well, there's a shape and you nourish it every day. But what if it's a positive shape? So this idea that Saturn Aquarius also talks about the shape of our thoughts and our consciousness. So part 4, the two sides of Aquarius, and we already started to talk about this a little bit because it's important, because when people come to me and they're like, well, what's going to happen? And I'm like, is it going to be good? Is Saturn Aquarius going to be good? Is it going to be easy? I'm like, I don't know. All we can do is look at what is the breadth of the archetype. What happened in previous times that Saturn was in Aquarius? What were the good things that happened? What were the negative things, the bad things that happened? Every sign of the zodiac is going to have a side that challenges, that side that destroys rather than creates, but it's up to us to create. So because it's Saturn's not an easy planet. It talks about lessons, it talks about time, it talks about karma, it talks about responsibilities. These are all Saturn's things. If you are age 28 and you're watching this webinar and you're coming up to your Saturn return, like life is now kind of at a little bit of an incline. You're going uphill now because it's meant to test you. It's meant to forge you. So even if you're not 28 or in your Saturn return, we're all being tested in a very particular area of our life. So there's the side of Saturn Aquarius that creates something positive. It creates balance, it creates equity. And then there's the side of Saturn Aquarius that creates separation. And we saw that, and we are still seeing this. I mean, how many of you have spent so much time alone or separated from your family members? I mean, I've spent the majority of the last 10 months alone, except for, face-to-face over Zoom client work. I mean, you think about it, that's bananas. That's not how humans normally are made to live. So we have to sort of see where we're having these both sides happening. So, you know, as I was saying a few moments ago, like we have to see how this is starting to come up for both of us and try to find a balance, try to make decisions or make new systems or create new structures of connection and social connection that fuel the positive side of Saturn and Aquarius. So to that point, like dystopian versus utopian, disconnection versus connection, inhumanity versus humanity. One of the things I remember when I got into astrology more deeply, this was at the time of my own Saturn return, I remember reading about Saturn through the different signs and Saturn through the different houses in astrology, or Saturn in the different rooms, to use that example I was giving you all earlier. I remember thinking how Saturn in Aquarius, or Saturn in the 11th room, is so much about friends and community and social connection. And this is the case for what we're going to be experiencing over the next couple of years. But there is this sense of like somebody with Saturn in Aquarius or somebody with Saturn in the 11th, they either have like a lot of friends or they don't. But I think what I started to discover over time is, and seems to come up a lot, and maybe if you have Saturn in Aquarius, you can resonate with this statement. There is this energy in Saturn in Aquarius, or Saturn in the 11th house or 11th room, of feeling like an outsider. You know, they've got their nose pressed against the glass, they're looking in or looking out, and they're trying to figure out, how do I connect to them? So there's always this longing for something. Wherever Saturn is, we kind of feel the acute lack of something when Saturn is in a sign. I feel like those with Saturn in Aquarius, there is this longing for your place in the world, this longing for your community, your people, your tribe. And so we're all, you know, regardless of whether we have Saturn in Aquarius or not, going to be feeling that, but it's something that we have to, of course, conquer or, you know, overcome when Saturn is in Aquarius, which is something that I noticed. There's like this ache with Saturn and Aquarius. It's like, who are our friends? And sometimes when Saturn goes through, this is just a side note, so, and this is maybe more of a comment for the Aries and Aries rising. When Saturn goes through the 11th, Saturn can be a little brutal in the 11th. It's like, who are your friends? These people are not your friends. And maybe to that point, this is something that we're all going to be thinking about over the next couple of years. Like, who are our friends? And maybe after the first bit of the pandemic earlier this year, you know, March until the summer, March until July, the people that are still remaining in our lives are like the people that really kind of are strong allies or strong connections. So Saturn is really testing our connection right now. And to an earlier point, what will we choose? So let's look at the previous Saturn and Aquariuses, because this gives us a sense of expectation. It gives us a framework in which to look at what's going on right now. Do keep in mind that it's not a repeat. It can't be a repeat. Why? Well, the planets in the sky are different than where they were in the 60s, in the 90s, in the 30s, and so forth. Like, for example, like Pluto's in Capricorn. Pluto was not in Capricorn in the 90s or the 60s and so forth. So we have to sort of use these different moments in time as a touchstone, but not as a, like, it's going to be definitely like this, because we are living the present. We are living this time. We are not living the past. So this photo of the March on Washington, and I apologize if there's any non-Americans watching these. Some of these examples are a little Amerocentric, but the March on Washington, one of the most seminal moments in the civil rights movement, at least here in the United States, was August of 1963. Saturn was in Aquarius. I think Saturn was at 18 Aquarius. So this idea that we have to look at our inequity when Saturn is in Aquarius, we have to find equity, because Saturn, this is a technical point, but it's a good reminder for everybody. And I've said this before, Saturn is exalted in Libra. An exaltation means that a planet does its best work in that sign. It's based on old systems called essential dignity. Saturn in Libra, Saturn does its best work in the sign of partnership, balance, cooperation, equity, fairness, one-on-one connection. So we know that instinctively, Saturn just wants balance. Saturn just wants equity. So whether this is a societal conversation we're all having over the next couple of years or a personal conversation, just know that Saturn wants equity. And we saw this during the 1960s. Here's more pictures in the 1960s. The photo on the right is of JFK, President of the United States in the 1963. The Saturn Aquarius overlaps with the start of the space program. Saturn in Capricorn, Saturn Aquarius, you saw the first early technological advances that led us to go into space. Now, this is from American perspective. Obviously, there was space flight elsewhere before this. This photo right here is of John Glenn. This, I believe, was 1962 or maybe 1961. This is when I think it was like the first United States orbit of the planet. So this idea that it's so much about technology, it's about what is beyond this world. Is there going to be more of a focus on space or space technology or satellites, which brings me to the 1990s. Some of this might look like a little familiar if you're of a certain generation. On the left is a screenshot of Netscape, one of the earliest internet browsers. The internet was actually born with Saturn and Aquarius. The internet as we know it, meaning it wasn't a military technology, it was a public technology, was born in August of 1991. So the internet is having its Saturn return, which is funny because we're all on Zooms. Now we're on our space phones and our apps. But this, I'm kind of dating myself for a moment, because I'm 42. So I just remember this time where it was just like, wow, you mean I can like get on the computer and then I can talk to somebody in Australia or I can send an email. It just was mind blowing at the time. And you suddenly realize that you were connected. This image to the right of the screenshot is kind of mapping out all these different webs and threads of different, I guess, IP addresses to show what does the internet look like as a map or a system, which brings me to this image, which is a image of, it's called the Laniakea, hopefully I'm saying this correctly, supercluster. So our galaxy, the Milky Way, is actually not the only galaxy out there. When you keep zooming out, not to blow your mind, when you keep zooming out, all these different galaxies start to form clusters and patterns and networks and systems. And it doesn't look that different than that map I showed you of the internet. So this idea that Aquarius really does connect us to this principle that we hear over and over again in astrology, as above, so below. Aquarius is showing us that whether it's something on a microscopic level or something on a galactic level, it's all connected. So this is sort of a bigger question, like what are the social issues that are going to come to the forefront 2021, 2022, and 2023? Well, we already have seen a preview of that. What technologies are going to emerge? And this might be technologies that are trying to fight the pandemic. This could be technologies that are trying to solve or to mitigate us having to do everything at a distance, or us having to do everything over Zoom, over a Zoom call. So it'll be really interesting to see where things are at in March of 2023. Maybe we'll just all be holograms at that time. This is some screenshots from Unsplash of some of the protests and the Black Lives Matter protest from June of 2020. This was in response to the murder of George Floyd. So this became a global thing. The image on the left is from Paris. The image on the right, I believe, is from Los Angeles. And then also the technological side of things, wherever there's kind of this race to find the vaccine, there's, this idea that it's not just an arms race, it's a science race right now. And so you're seeing there's a huge competitiveness between countries of who is going to find the vaccine, which I think that's kind of the higher side of Aquarius, is that you do this for the good of humanity and you share it, but that's just another, my own personal beliefs. And will we have a collective shift to consciousness? I bring this up because everybody's like, oh, Aquarius, age of Aquarius. You know what? We'll see. I think that there is a push to have some sort of societal shift. There's a push to have some shift in thinking, but we all have free will. There's 8.5 billion of us on this planet. Will there be a greater awakening and awareness? I don't know. Maybe I'm a little cautious, but we'll see. Part 6 is the Great Conjunction. I wanted to talk really briefly about this because it's contextual to Saturn's time in Aquarius, and I know that people are going to ask about it. Saturn and Jupiter are aligning on December 21st, 2020. The last time they did this was in 1981. Wait, that's not true. The last time they did this was in 2000. This is something called a Great Conjunction. And a Great Conjunction only happens every 20 years. Now, Jupiter and Saturn they deal with life on a societal level, on a much bigger level than on a day-to-day human personality level. So they deal with things that are much bigger than us. And they are starting a cycle that will unfold for 20 years. And this is a cycle that is lived out at the level of humanity, society, the collective. This is about governance and our laws and about law and order and the sort of the structure of things. The thing that's the big news about this is that this is the conjunctions, which happen every 20 years, are now going to start to move into air signs. They do this every 20 years. The conjunctions shift from one element to the next. So this is the first time, this is the first conjunction, except the December of 1980 throughout 2 other points in 1981 when it was in Libra. This is the first time it's been in Aquarius since the 1400s, since the early 1400s. So this is what's called a great mutation. It means that the conjunctions are now shifting elements. Age of Aquarius, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to make any big promises. I think that there's, especially in different corners of the internet, and some people have asked me this, like, oh, what about the age of Aquarius? I'm like, I don't know, because the age of Aquarius, depending on who you ask, it either has already happened or it will happen in 200 years. So I think that there's something that's happening on a greater level that's shifting us more thematically as a culture, as a humanity, towards these Aquarian archetypes. So the age of Aquarius, just like on a astronomical level, simply means that the constellation of Aquarius is rising at the moment of the spring equinox. Astrology is a fixed system. Aquarius is the first sign of the zodiac. Aquarius season begins when the sun has the spring equinox here in the northern hemisphere. But if you're actually looking at the sky, Aquarius is not the sign that's rising, not the zodiac sign that's rising at that moment. It hasn't done that for 2,000 years or more. It's been Pisces, and we've been in the age of Pisces, or we have left, depending on who you ask. This is what's called a great age. Every 2,000 years, the the great age shifts. Every 26,000 years is called a great year, not to blow your mind, but the only time that we will ever have the sky look exactly like it does right now, I mean, apart from some sort of supernova, we have to go 26,000 years from now, or 26,000 years previously. So these are what are called great ages. But it does mean that there's going to be a societal shift towards air. Air is connection. Air is science and technology. Air is communication and writing. It's systems and it's network. It's relationship, as opposed to Earth, which is where the conjunctions have been the last 200 years. Earth is capital. Earth is money. Earth is goods and services and things you can touch and own. And there's nothing wrong with that. It depends on what level of consciousness you're doing Earth, of course, but it does mean that we're going to start to shift towards air. Part 7, Saturn square Uranus. I also wanted to mention in 2021, there's going to be 3 squares between the planet Saturn and the planet Uranus. So now that Saturn is in Aquarius, it's in a 90-degree relationship with Uranus, which is in Taurus. So this is important to give context to what we are experiencing with Saturn and Aquarius, what you individually will be experiencing with Saturn and Aquarius. It's coming up against Uranus. If you know anything about Uranus as compared to Saturn, it's the friction between the old and the new. If you know your astronomy, we have our solar system, and then Saturn is what's called the last of the classical planets, meaning it's the last one that you can see with the naked eye. Anything beyond Saturn, you need a telescope. It was the Uranus, for example, was discovered in 1781. So it's a, quote unquote, modern planet. But Uranus is revolution. Uranus is, we cannot be imprisoned anymore by the things that aren't us, the things that keep us small, the things that keep us stuck. Which is ironic because Uranus is in Taurus right now. Taurus is like such an earth sign. It's like all about keeping things stable. But I think that to talk about this on a personal level, there's going to be some dynamic, there's going to be friction between 2 areas of your life next year. And you could argue that this will be until Uranus leaves Aquarius in March of 2023. So you're seeing one part of your life where Uranus is, that part of your life has seen a massive shift over the last 2 years because Uranus went into Taurus in May of 2018. It kind of dipped in and dipped out, and then it was back again on March of 2019. So that part of your life, the Taurus area is possibly radically different in some way, or is starting to see a radical difference, for example. So that part is all change, but then Saturn by its nature is a little bit more like conservative and practical. And even though it wants equity and balance, it's doing it motivated by a need to preserve. It needs to kind of make sure that things stay stable and even, but then you've got Uranus, which is the opposite of stable and even. So there's like this balance that's happening, or this clash that's happening. I have kind of a pet theory. We'll see if I'm right. My pet theory is that going back to 2008, actually, that was the year that Pluto went to Capricorn. Pluto hadn't been in Capricorn since the 1770s. Like that's a big, long period of time. So something began with each and every one of us in January 2008. There's a certain area of our life that Saturn just left that has needed to like be torn down and cleared and do a lot of deep and sometimes messy and even sometimes painful work. I have this feel, this is my pet theory. My pet theory is that we all needed to be at a certain place collectively in 2020. And we all like we're living our lives and dealing with Pluto and Capricorn in our own way. And 2020 happened, and it was this push to get us pretty much all in the same place, which I feel that's why 2020 for some people have been a hard correction, and 2020 for some other people has been an inconvenience or has been a difficulty, but not to the level of a hard correction. And I think that with now Saturn in Aquarius, with Uranus in Taurus, we now have to build something very new in our lives. It has to represent this new thing that's trying to come in, the space that we have cleared, not just since 2020, but since 2008. Saturn and Uranus have their own cycle. They were made an opposition in 2010. So this is sort of, we're having what's called the closing square. We're coming to the end of their cycle. So it's maybe think, there's a thread back to 2010 in all of this. And Saturn and Uranus, they opposed each other in Virgo and Pisces, and then also Libra and Aries. The conjunction, the start of the cycle, actually began in October of 1988. If you were born in 1988, you have these two planets conjunct one another. These are the 3 dates for the conjunction. Make note of them. You don't need to do it now. You can do it later when you get the slides. But these 3 dates, February 17th, June 14th, December 24th, 2020, these are 3 dates that there's going to be friction. If you, for example, have key planets at 7 degrees or near 7 degrees Aquarius to Taurus, or 13 degrees Aquarius to Taurus, or 11 degrees, there's more friction for you. There's more friction between an old life and a new life, an old way of being and a new way of being. This, to be honest, has already been happening. This is not like we go into Saturn in Aquarius and a light switch goes on. We've been preparing for this all 2020. So Aquarius and Taurus are what are called fixed signs, fixed zodiac signs. Their job is to fix, their job is to preserve and to keep things the same. So this is not a mutable square, meaning there's less flexibility. So I think that if you are particularly, especially if you're an Aquarius, especially if you're a Taurus, you're going to feel this friction a little bit more. Maybe you think, okay, great, Katie. But I think that this, just like I said, you already know this. You already know what the tension is. You've already felt it. Maybe the light bulb hasn't gone off. Maybe you haven't connected the different dots. But this is something that's already been unfolding. And this is why, for all of us, the days around these dates might be tense. So just FYI. So let's talk about the Saturn return. And even if you're not in your Saturn return, which means even if you were not born 1962, 1964, 1991 to 1994, this is still relevant information, because Saturn, as I said earlier, is the master timekeeper. It talks about where the lessons are, where the structure of your life, where's the contract that you signed, because you said that when you came into this life, you said, I'm going to learn X, Y, and Z, or X, Y, Z, if you say that. So you're returning to the master plan. You're returning to something that you said that you would do, something you said that you would learn. Now, if you're in the first Saturn return, this is a time when you have to sit down with Saturn, so to speak, and agree to this life. You agree to learn the lessons, to live the karma, to express the time, only your time, and to make something of this life. And if you have Saturn in Aquarius, whether you are 29, whether you are 58, you are learning about connection. You're learning about society, humanity. And then depending on the intricacies of your chart, that's going to apply to even like a more focused area of your life. And there's an element of when we get to the Saturn return, regardless of our age. And again, this is information that even if you're in your 30s, this is still important information, because Saturn is the planet that wants to see the receipts. So you get to the end of your 20s, you get to near the end of your 50s, and Saturn says, I want to see the receipts. And there are ages every 7 years after the Saturn return until you get to the full cycle where Saturn has a big check-in with you. This could be age 36, for example, or your early 40s or early to mid 40s. And Saturn says, okay, show me the receipts. Do you want to make a big change or not? Because you have free will. Saturn's like, I'm just trying to make sure you hit your highest potential. I mean, I can do a whole webinar on the Saturn return, but ultimately Saturn, and this is something I talked about in another webinar, it comes to us in three ways. It's either like the archetype of the teacher or the mentor or somebody that is like the life coach, or Saturn's the parent telling us, don't do this, like kind of setting boundaries and showing us where we have to be more responsible. Or Saturn's the cop. Saturn's like, we've gone against ourselves. We've gone against the master plan. We've done something that we know is maybe not the best thing. So we kind of get that, karma is just showing us the what our actions have created. So I love Saturn, even though Saturn's not an easy planet. I talk about Saturn a lot in my work, and that's because Saturn is so predictable. Because Saturn is so much about the structure and the curriculum and the time of our lives. And when we know what our own structure is, what our curriculum is, it kind of takes some of the existential guessing work out of our lives. So when you get to the first Saturn return, this is where Saturn, or rather life, is saying, okay, it's time to be an adult. And you think you're an adult, but then you go through this almost like an alchemy of becoming an adult, this rite of passage to becoming an adult, and you get to 30 and everything feels different, even though it's just a year. And then you get to the second Saturn return, and the idea is that at this point you become Saturn. You've done the work, you've learned the lessons, and now you are Saturn. You are the mentor. You are somebody that people look up to. You have the wisdom, you have the answers. You are the teacher, for example. Or the second Saturn return is where the major course correction, because you've gotten off the master plan. So I know this is like a slightly blunt statement, but it's supposed to be hard. So there's some area of our life that is going to have the friction, is going to have the uphill climb. When you go to the gym, for example, when we could go to gyms, if you keep doing something on the easiest setting, you're not gonna learn anything. You're not gonna build any muscle. You're not gonna achieve anything. So Saturn sort of turns up the resistance, adds some weight to a certain area of our life, so we grow, so we mature. As I was saying in this, previously, if you were born with Saturn and Aquarius, like you're mastering Aquarius in your life. So that means you're mastering society, you're mastering connection, disconnection, you're mastering themes around belonging, and maybe the part of you that is very future oriented and maybe does feel different because you get things that other people don't get, or maybe the part of you that is impassioned by societal concerns and social justice and social inequity and helping other people. So these are themes that are all threaded through your own Saturn return. And like I said, even if you are not in your Saturn return right now, this is pinging back to your Saturn, to your lessons, to your master plan, because this time is relational to the major time that you are living. I mean, I'm Saturn in Virgo. So it doesn't matter if Saturn is in Aquarius or Capricorn or Leo, it's always going to go back to my Saturn and Virgo lessons. And that's why I teach, I share so much, because it's coming from my own Saturn and Virgo lessons. I have Saturn in the 9th house. So it's always coming back to like, I have to be the teacher. I have to share my wisdom with you all. If I'm not living my master plan. So we need to show, by the time we get to the end of Saturn in Aquarius, so March of 2023, we have to demonstrate to Saturn that we got the lesson. Now, we just had this with Saturn and Capricorn. Saturn spent the first 2 weeks of December of 2020 hanging out at the end of Capricorn. And Saturn was saying to each and every one of us, all right, what do we build? What did we build? What did we learn? How did we mature? How did we grow in our own way over the last 2-3 years? And it was a lot of hard growth, to be honest. So I know you all been waiting for a sign by sign look. I'm just going to quickly look at the chat and see if there's any, oh yeah, Laura said disinformation versus misinformation. That's a good point, Lauren. I would also say that we're seeing the information, disinformation, is this real, is this not real? That's also Neptune and Pisces. That's a whole other thing, because it's almost like Neptune went into Pisces in 2011, 2012. And now it's like, is this real? You have so many people telling you things are not real. And so I think that there's this kind of shadow side of Neptune and Pisces about reality versus unreality versus fake reality. But that's another question for another point for another time. So let's look at this sign by sign. Quick note for those that are watching the replay, because I get this question all the time as an astrologer. They're like, well, which should I look at? Should I look at my sun sign or should I look at my rising sign? Look at both. Why? Because astrology is about understanding something from the relationship from your sun or the relationship from your rising sign, which are these 2 points that talk about you. You could, in theory, read for your moon sign. And you might start to see like, oh, there's actually a story that's happening when I look at my moon sign. But because the sun and the rising are so much about you and the self, it's gonna register more. You could read this for your Venus because it's something called derived houses in astrology. It's kind of a technical point. But in that analogy that I made earlier, meaning you have these 2 astrology houses, or 1 if you're born in sunrise, you're like a multidimensional being. You are living these parallel tracks. You are living these different times that overlap and synthesize. And you might be in an Aries, for an example, but you might have Sagittarius rising. And how does that story start to form like something that build like sorry, this is not articulate, meaning how do you take these 2 signs and you start to synthesize them into another story? I think that's a better way to put that. So do read for your sun sign, do read for your rising sign. If you do not know your rising sign, it's not the end of the world. If you have your birth time, you can just look it up, what's my rising sign? You'll get like a website, you can plug in your birth information and it will tell you. If you don't know your rising sign because of other reasons, you can get a lot of good information out of your sun sign. So let's start with Aries or Aries rising. So Saturn right now has gone into your 11th. So maybe I'll use this analogy of the 11th room. The 11th room is the room of friends. It's the room of community, it's the room of social connection. And Saturn says to you, okay, who are your friends? Who are your allies? Who are your connections? And when Saturn gets to this part of the room, and I said this earlier, as an example, but Saturn can be a little brutal because Saturn is not a planet that's thinking about tomorrow. It's thinking about the next decade. It's thinking about the next 3 decades. Saturn is a planet that thinks long term. So who are the people that are going to stand the test of time with you? Who are the people that are rock solid friendships? How do you create connection if you don't have connection right now? Who, this might mean you're joining groups. This means that you're, some ice and snow just fell down. This could mean that you are, getting out there more virtually, unfortunately, right now. But the 11th room also talks about social causes and community, or getting more involved with your community. Maybe even getting involved with politics, because this is the part of the chart that also does talk about politics. So, running for office could be in this part of your experience. I mean, obviously not everybody's going to run for office or get involved in something on a political or a community level right now, but it is about, where do you belong? It is about your connection to something bigger. And this is also the part of the chart that wants you to look ahead. Like, what are your hopes and dreams for the future? What are your wishes? Because you've just come off of Saturn in Capricorn, which was so much about your place in the world and your career. But then what's the next step? You've, in theory, when Saturn reaches the top of the chart, so when it reached Capricorn, you've achieved something. You reached your goals, hopefully. Now, what are your next goals? So you're also in a time of planning. You're also in a time of thinking ahead. These things that you want to achieve over the next Saturn cycle, so the next 10, 15, or even 30 years. And I did say this earlier, Saturn is testing your friendships. And if somebody is not a true friend, you might see like who's really there for you, who's not. So Taurus and Taurus rising. Taurus, you're in an interesting spot, and I kind of alluded to this when we talked about the Saturn square Uranus. Uranus is in Taurus, and Uranus has been in Taurus since 2018, 2019. So Taurus, you are in the midst of a revolution. You are in the midst of a massive reinvention. And you, God bless you, Taurus is the least change-loving sign, because you're a fixed sign. It is your desire, it is your deep instinctual motivation to plant down roots, to keep things the same, to create a stable life. But you've got the planet Uranus, which is about awakenings, which is about revolution, which is about trying to save you from you, trying to get you unstuck. So you've got that, and then you've got Saturn now coming up into the top of your chart. We call it the 10th room. It's called the 10th house in astrology. The 10th room is the highest room in the house. It's about your place in the world. It's the most visible. It's your title after your name. It's your career. So Saturn is saying a very simple thing to you over the next 2 years. What do you want to be when you grow up? It doesn't matter if you're 25 or 85. I don't think anybody's 85 on this call, but this is a time when a few things may happen, but we have to take it in context with what's happening with Uranus. Uranus is trying to make you, meaning we all fall into line. This is the negative side of Saturn. We do things because we think we're supposed to do them, not because we want to do them. We do things because it's the expectation of our family, our community, something more. But who are we really? So you're sort of in this time of trying to strip away the stuff that's not really you. And that may affect your direction in life. Let's say, for example, Taurus, this is sort of the example I use a lot. Let's say you are a lawyer because you come from a long line of lawyers, like mom and dad were lawyers, their parents were lawyers, and it's just expected that you become a lawyer, but you don't want to be a lawyer, and you're sort of just kind of cut that self off about you just so you can move through the day because you don't want to upset the apple cart. But Uranus is like, you want to be a massage therapist, you want to bake, you want to do ... whatever that ... is. So your world is shaking. It's been shaking for 2 years. And Uranus is like, you need to be you. Can't be anybody else. You have to get out of your ruts. You have to get out of your patterns. You have to get out of the things that prevent you from living in freedom. Doesn't mean you can't have stability and security. You just have to do it in integrity with yourself. So Uranus, or rather Saturn, is now saying, okay, what are we doing professionally? What's our title? And if you're like, I should be a lawyer because my parents are a lawyer, but I want to do something different, then it may mean that the next couple of years are about changing direction, changing course. Or because Uranus just wants more in a way. It's like, this is you, okay, let's do you 100%. So you're like growing and evolving rapidly with Uranus and Taurus. And it means your professional life, your ambitions, your title, your career can now open up in ways that you haven't been able to because you've been like this, you've just been living 20% of yourself, for example. Nevertheless, Saturn on paper is more of a conservative planet. It's thinking long-term. It's thinking about how do we build for success? How do we build a professional life? So you might be doing a lot of hard work in the next couple of years. You might be working hard to secure your place in the world. There may be promotions, there may be job changes, there may be job course corrections, as I was alluding to earlier. But this is very much about responsibility. The bar is set higher for you at this time because Saturn sets a high bar. Gemini and Gemini rising. So Saturn has now walked into your 9th room, the 9th house of the chart. And to get to the 9th room, you have to go through the 8th. And Saturn, when it was in Capricorn, was in Gemini's 8th room. This is why 2018, 2019, and 2020 were not easy time for Gemini. It's because it was a time of a lot of self-examination, having to face itself, having to look at all the deepest, darkest parts of itself. So I tell people that you cannot get to the 9th. The 9th is wisdom, the 9th is faith, the 9th is truth, without going through the 8th. So I think the next 2 years for Gemini, for example, is you have to now unpack everything that you've been through. Meaning, what do you believe in? Do you still believe in anything? Or is your faith still intact? Do you now have a new philosophy on life? And if you've been through a crisis, and I know this from personal experience, you know what you're capable of when you make it through. You're like, okay, now I can handle that. Well, how does this shift and shape the way that I see the world? So this is a time when it's more existential. It's more, you're looking outward to the world. Maybe you're looking at different faiths or even different religions or different philosophies to help you make sense of life. This is a time when it's about conviction. It's about having a strong sense of right and wrong. And Gemini is a sign that in its darkest shadow, there's an amorality within it, within the archetype. But I think Gemini has to find some sort of moral compass over the next 2 years. No, morality and moral is like a really heavy word. Maybe there's a less heavy word, but you know what I mean. It's like what guides us? And if it's not a religion, if it's not a philosophy, then we have to build our own philosophy. We have to build our own faith, even if it's having faith in nothing. When Saturn gets to this room or Saturn gets to this part of the chart, it's very classic astrology that it's about higher education. Somebody goes back to school, somebody goes and gets a degree, somebody, there's a sense of like you are getting the education, the specialized education that you need in order to put that towards your professional life when Saturn goes into the 10th. And so in the case of Gemini, when Saturn goes into Pisces in 2023, I realize we can't travel freely as we did. Who knows what will be the case in 2021 or in 2022. But this part of the chart also talks about foreign travel, long distance journeys, serious trips, serious exploration. If you can't physically travel, there's a sense of needing to look out into the world in other ways. Cancer and Cancer rising. So Gemini sort of hands the baton to you. Saturn has now gone into Cancer's 8th room. So I tell people that, again, astrology, the zodiac is just the wheel of life, meaning everything that happens in creation, everything that happens in life has some place in this chart, in this house, in these rooms. And when you get to the 8th room, it's a necessary room. It's a room we all have to go through at different points of our life, maybe once, maybe twice, maybe 3 times. And when we get to the 8th room, we have to go in and we have to face ourselves. It is a deeply psychological space, meaning the next 2 years for Cancer are going to be deeply psychological. I tell people when Saturn begins to lead you into the 8th, the best thing you can do is have emotional support in the form of a therapist, the form of a guide or a counselor. I always bring up this Greek word. It's like my SAT $1 million word when I think of this time. You need a psychopomp. A psychopomp means somebody who's, like Mercury, the god Mercury, was a psychopomp. Mercury could lead you in and out of the underworld. The only person, and bring you back, meaning like if you were mortal and you went into the underworld, you stayed there because you were dead. So I use this as a metaphor, like you are going into your underworld. You need somebody to guide you in and out. Otherwise, it's a really hard thing to do alone. I'm not trying to scare you, Cancer. It's just you are now in the doorway of a 2-year period where it's about a lot of deep emotional, spiritual, existential examination. This means if there are things from the past that you have not been dealing with, and sometimes I get clients where they've just been putting stuff into the 8th room and closing the door, not looking, not dealing, and then the next 2 years you can't skip it, you can't avoid it, you have to work on it. Some people have already been doing their work. So your experience with this time is just going to take you more deeply into yourself, because this is the period of time where you test yourself. You test who you think you are. You test your ability. It's like the spiritual pressure, the spiritual alchemy that is necessary for you to grow on a soul level, on a spiritual level, on an emotional level. And this is the growth that then leads you to the 9th, wisdom, faith, truth. So this could mean facing your quote unquote demons. This could mean like really feeling vulnerable. Maybe it's feeling vulnerable for the first time. It's about intimacy. It's about, even, I don't have this written on the screen, it's about sexuality. Because this room is next to the 7th. The 7th is about relationships. Well, if you get into a serious relationship with somebody, you have to be vulnerable. You have to be intimate. Otherwise, it's just a connection. So there's a reason why this space is next to the 7th room. But you are building emotional strength over the next couple of years. And Saturn is going to be, if you work with Saturn in the next 2 years, it's going to be such a huge ally and a huge asset to you. Leo and Leo rising. So Saturn has just walked into your 7th room, the 7th sign, the zodiac. This is the sign, Aquarius that opposes yours, meaning Aquarius is the sign opposite of Leo. This is going to be likely a major time in your life. The next 2 years will likely, or not, but more than so than not, coincide with major milestones. Excuse me. So this is about new relationship. This is about new connection. This is about new people coming into your life. If you are in an existing relationship, then this is when Saturn tests that relationship, or Saturn says, okay, we need to take this relationship to the next level. Because as I've said previously, Saturn is not thinking about tomorrow. I think Saturn is thinking about the next 10, 15, 20, even 30 years. So if you're in a marriage, if you're in a committed partnership, Saturn is basically saying to you, like, what are we doing? What is the next level? If you are cohabitating with somebody, is it marriage? If you are cohabitating with somebody and maybe you buy property, something that symbolizes the next milestone in the relationship. If you're not seeing anybody, maybe you have no desire for a relationship, this is nevertheless still a time that's about relationship. So it's about, well, what is your connection with people across the board? Like, how are you connecting, disconnecting at all? This is a time because the seventh sign, the seventh room, teaches us that we can't do it alone. We need help. We need a partner, we need partnership, we need balance, we need equity. There's those words again. So if something is out of balance in your life because you try to do it all yourself, for example, Leo, then this is about bringing in new harmony and new balance into your life. It's just very classic astrology, like old school astrology, when Saturn goes to this area, there's either like a marriage or a sort of major relationship milestone. If, for example, you're in a relationship and it's really weak going into this time, Saturn is saying to you, if you don't do the necessary work or you make the necessary choices, that it's quite possible, I'm not going to make a hard prediction for anybody, but it's quite possible that it will end by March of 2023. I've seen things where a relationship ends, a marriage ends, because Saturn goes into the seventh room, and then by the time Saturn leaves the seventh room, there's somebody else. So that's also a possibility, because it was still a time that was about relationship. It was a time where it was about, maybe it was not the person you were with because it's not sustainable, it's not equitable, it's not working. And then to create the space for somebody new to come in. Virgo rising. So you're now coming into a time where it's actually kind of like being a Virgo. Aquarius, believe it or not, has a lot in common with Virgo. Aquarius is Virgo's sixth sign. Virgo is the sixth sign of the zodiac. So there's that connection. So Saturn has walked into your sixth room. Saturn is taking one look at how do you take care of your body? What are the foods that you eat? How do you organize your day-to-day life? What's out of balance in your day-to-day life? Are you organized or disorganized? I realize not every Virgo is color-coded binder organized, like my mom, a Virgo, is. So everybody has a different expression of Virgo or Virgo rising. So over the next couple of years, you need craft, you need diligence, you need to look at the details. If something is wildly disorganized or wildly out of balance, Saturn is not going to let it slide anymore. It's a classic time for you to hopefully make positive changes in your health. It's very common that when Saturn leaves this part of the chart, you've taken on some new fitness regimen, or you've made some serious changes in your diet. Maybe you become vegetarian or something else, because you need to bring some sort of order and harmony into your day-to-day life, or some sort of something that will actually feed your body and fuel your body in the way that your body needs to be fed and fueled. Again, it's about creating purity. It's about creating new systems of organization, new networks. And I think Virgo, because Aquarius is your sixth sign, it's a part, Aquarius is a very future-oriented sign. And I think that Virgos can be very future-oriented, can be very technologically adaptive. So you might be looking at technology to create more systems and organization in your day-to-day life. You may even look at alternative health or different ways to approach healing, whether it's sound, whether it's energy, for you to bring organization in your day-to-day life, Virgo. You've already spent the last few years really trying to become you over the 2018, 2020 with Saturn in Capricorn. So with all that in mind, this is essentially one of those moments in your personal astrology where you have to get your life in order, which I know Virgo, that's something that you typically do well. Now the bar is set higher. Excuse me. Libra and Libra rising. Libra, you're coming out of a really possibly heavy time, because Saturn is coming out of the bottom of your chart. So it was about home and family the past couple of years. But now, after everything that's happened, who are you? Saturn is sort of asking you some simple questions about what is your persona? What is your identity? What is your character? This room in the astrology house, the fifth room, it's hard to quantify because we're talking about the self. It's not, the money you make. It's not the people in your life. It's about you, and not you on a very rudimentary level. It's how do you express you? Express your talents, express your creativity. And maybe thinking, Katie, like, I'm not that creative, I'm not that talented, but we all have something. And we all have something that gets us to express who we really are. And this is why the fifth room is also the room of children. And so I put children and pregnancy in the slide, like if this is relevant, of course, not for everybody, this is not relevant, but there's a need to sort of create, even if it's a child, there's a need to be around children, or there's a need to take that creator children energy in a different way. Like maybe you're a writer, so you're creating books, you're creating manuscripts during this time. One of the examples that I use when I talk about this part of the chart is Beethoven, for example. Nobody is ever going to hear Beethoven the way that Beethoven played it 200 years ago when he was composing his music and he's performing his music. He's dead. So you have a whole industry of people that make a living by playing Beethoven, but will we ever hear Beethoven the way that Beethoven played it? No. But these people put themselves into the notes, put themselves into his scores and his operas and his concertos and his works, and they bring life to it. So, in a way, what are you bringing life to? What are you inhabiting? You don't have to be a performer. You don't even have to be Beethoven. But this is a place that is reserved for us to inhabit our lives and inhabit our lives even more, and to know who we are on a much deeper level. So this is sort of the mantra, the question that Virgo, for example, was learning the past few years. Like, are you taking yourself seriously? And because you are coming off the time when Saturn was at the bottom of your chart, this is the point where maybe you've kind of created your family, you've moved in with a partner, you've maybe bought a house, all the things that maybe happened for the last 3 years. And now it's about family or children, if that's relevant, of course. So Scorpio rising, this is a time when it's about settling down. So, Libra just kind of passed the baton to you, for example. Saturn is now at the bottom of your chart. So the bottom of the chart is about home and it's about family. It's about planting down roots. It's about foundation. So over the next couple of years, it's quite likely that there's going to be a major move. Is every Scorpio going to have a major move? Of course not. But something about this time is symbolizing this time, meaning you could stay in the same place that you're in, but how does the place that you're in symbolize that you are kind of making a commitment to where you're at? You're saying, okay, this is it. I'm staying here. I'm staying in this neighborhood. I'm staying in this apartment or in this house or whatever. Saturn is just starting to arc towards into the bottom of the chart. So it is more of a domestic time for Scorpio and Scorpio rising. It's about creating your own family. If you don't have your own family, it's about creating new connections with your family. It's about focusing on your family. And I know family is a complicated issue for a lot of people. So this is when you're maybe having to kind of look at the past, look at past emotions, look at past memories, set hard boundaries, especially if, unfortunately, if you have toxic parents, which I see that a lot in my work as you tell me your stories. So if it's not mom and dad who are your family, then who is your family? Who is your home? What is home? Who is home? People may be moving out of your house, roommates or partnerships, but it is very much about home and family. And even just, because this is about your roots, even ancestors, even stuff about ancestry and stuff that you've inherited from them, emotional, spiritual, might be coming to the forefront. But this, and I will put Scorpios in the same box as Leo, although I didn't mention it with Leo, and Taurus, and also Aquarius. Uranus, this kind of Saturn square Uranus is like more of a bigger deal for your sign. So Scorpio 2021 might be more friction in some way. It might demand this sort of reconciliation between the old and the new. It might push you to, if you're putting down roots, if you're settling down, maybe it's in a very different way, because Scorpio, Uranus is in your relationship sign. So you're already in a time where the people that are coming into your life are challenging you to be you. These are relationships and people that might be very different than the types of people that you've connected with before, or the types of people you've been in relationship with. So Scorpio, maybe you're starting a major relationship and one that's very different than the past, but it's kind of, at the same time, you're settling down, you're like planning down roots and maybe examining the past. I'll just kind of leap back to Leo because I didn't really mention Leo, that Uranus is in what's called your 10th. It's in your career. Leo, you're in the midst of a career transformation. So yeah, it's about relationships for you, but how do relationships affect your direction in life? And like, how do you reconcile that tension between these two parts? And I'm in particular focusing on just these 4 signs. It's not to say that it's not going to be with the other signs, but these are the 4 signs that are going to feel it the most: Taurus, Leo, Aquarius, and Scorpio. Sagittarius and Sagittarius rising. So Saturn is now in your 3rd room. The 3rd room in the house is the room of voice and communication and ideas and information and learning. You walk in and it's a library. It's a library of all these different possibilities and all these different choices and all these different flavors. It's a room that's meant to kind of show you because it's a Gemini room. It's meant to show you like, oh, it could be a left or a right. It could be up or down. Nevertheless, classes, learning, even teaching, because Sagittarius, you are sort of one of the teachers of the zodiac, might be very much a theme into the beginning of 2023. So it's probably going to be a 2-year period where you're flexing your mind, you're flexing your wisdom. Sagittarius, you have a lot of wisdom. This is also a time when you might be starting writing a manuscript, or doing some sort of writing or speaking or communication project. I mean, Aquarius, because it is a Saturn sign, you have to sort of push yourself higher. The bar is higher. And so one of the big questions for you right now is, how are people hearing you? Are they hearing you? Because your voice now has to mature. Your mind has to mature. You also need to see things from a different perspective, because the idea is that when when Saturn gets to the end of the third room, packing his bags and trying to go to the fourth, that you need to be able to weigh your choices and weigh your options and know which way you are going. This is, maybe there's publishing during this time. This is also, that's a room of travel. Again, we're not really doing a lot of traveling right now. So that's might be more metaphoric travel, symbolic travel, but maybe things will change in the next, 2022. Personally, side note, I think as long as the South Node is in Sagittarius, which it is until the end of 2021, we're probably going to keep having some form of restricted travel. Capricorn and Capricorn rising. I think Capricorn, number one, can celebrate that Saturn is no longer in Capricorn, where it was since the beginning of 2018. But this is a time, because Saturn is your ruling planet. Saturn, whatever Saturn is doing, talks a lot about the pace and rhythm of your life. So it spent 3 years, 2018, 2019, and most of 2020 in Capricorn. So you are in a new time, a new cycle, a new phase of life. And maybe you saw a lot of new beginnings in this period, but it was not easy. You had Pluto there. You had to really forge a new path. You had to tear down old structures that weren't working. You had to do things in a very different way that really set you up on a path that would take you over the next 30 years. So now Saturn is in Aquarius. Now Saturn has walked you into the second room. The second room is the money room. It's how do you earn a living? It's the money in your bank account. It's your sense of intrinsic value of things. It's your motivations to create material security, material stability in your life. It's, like I said, like how you earn a living. And so if you might need to earn a living in a different way, because Saturn is always trying to push the bar higher. Saturn is saying, okay, well, you're spending your money on this right now, but this is not sustainable. This is not going to get you to the long term. And I know, Capricorn of all signs, like you typically already are at a higher level than most signs. So maybe it's, it's not so dire, but in that, per that example, but Saturn really wants you to look at the books right now. Saturn is like, okay, what do you need in order to feel stable and safe and secure in this world? So you might be like, oh, I need to get really pared down. I need to start saving money, or maybe you're making big purchases over the next couple of years, a home, for example, or something that's very symbolic of this next time in your life. I just came out of this period because I'm Sagittarius rising, and I went into Saturn in the second, like, all right, I have all this money saved up. Like, I think I'm pretty good. But Saturn said, oh, you think this is what you need? Saturn gets really down to the point, like, what do you actually need? But through that, you start to build new systems. There's that word, Aquarius. You build new systems to create new material stability in your life. Like I said, you make investments, make purchases, but there's a sense of this part of your life, it's like a very material time. And I mean that in the best possible way. I mean, we are physical beings. We live in the physical world. We need a roof over our head. This is very much about that nuts and bolts, resources and things you own, things you need, things you're buying your money on, things you're acquiring. And you don't have to spend money. It could be stuff that you're accumulating, stuff that people are giving to you, for example, but stuff that you own, physical nevertheless. So it's really a time that's about your material life. But even your self-worth, because if how you earn a living or the dollar sign that you put on your work, you think it's this much, but it's coming from a place of severe lack of self-worth, then Saturn's like, this is not sustainable. Like, you're worth so much more than this. So there's a lot of deep lessons over the next couple of years of really knowing what your self-worth is, being able to define it. And it's not about money, of course, but it's saying like, no, I'm valuable, or this is what my time is worth. This is what my efforts are worth. So this is very much, like I said, a time of material stability and material security. Aquarius, we're starting to get to the end of the signs. Aquarius, you are coming out of a 3-year period where Saturn was in the last sign of your chart. It was in the 12th room. So the last few years were about shedding the past, letting go, kind of almost like a Marie Kondo way, like clearing out the things spiritually or even physically that just don't suit you anymore, getting rid of the baggage. So you're coming into this time where it's a new phase. It's a new 30-year cycle, or 29 if we're going to be completely precise. Saturn is your planet. Whatever Saturn does talks about you. It talks about what you're feeling. It talks about the direction and the time and the pacing. And you, Aquarius, and this is the same for Capricorn, with Saturn as your planet, it means that every 2.5 to 3 years, it's a new chapter. It's a new story. Because that's the amount of time it takes for Saturn to get through a sign. If you add it all up, it takes 29 years to go through all the zodiac signs. So you're starting this new time, this new phase, and you might feel older. You might feel time. You might feel like, wow, after everything that's happened, like where are we at? Saturn is essentially saying to you, it's time to be Saturn. It's time to be, your higher potential. So you might feel the sort of the weight of time. You might feel the weight of responsibility, because you now have to be the person. You have, and I was thinking a lot about this, because one of my big, kind of takeaways from Saturn and Capricorn is like, now I'm the person. Now I'm the person that people are asking my answers, or people want my help, or I'm the like, I remember thinking like, oh, one day I'll grow up and I'll be like this person. I'm just like, oh shoot, I'm now that person. Oh, excuse me. So this is a new chapter, a new phase, and you now have to be that person. And so you're growing up, you're growing older, you're getting wiser. It's a little bit of a heavier time, Aquarius. And I say this because you're in this kind of that same boat with Scorpio, with Leo, with Taurus as well. Uranus is at the bottom of your chart. It's about home, your whole home life is shaking up right now, where you live, where your family, where you plant down roots, and maybe you've made a big move in the last couple of years. I've known a lot of Aquariuses that their life and even where they lived at the beginning of 2018 is radically different than where it is now. Because the kind of the goalposts have shifted so wildly, and because you might be in a very different place emotionally and spiritually than you were 2 years ago, this is a time for you to really start to consolidate a lot of the big changes that have happened. I think of a friend 3 years ago, her and her husband, they moved across country. They moved from New York to California. And now she's about to welcome twins into her life. So her whole life, like she's now like going into this new chapter as a mom. She's going into this new chapter, like on top of the one that she had this like huge change and huge shift to another state, and California is very different than New York. So that's just kind of give you some example. But the idea is that when Saturn gets to the end of Aquarius, in March of 2023, you have stepped up to the bar. You have sort of earned that position of authority. You've kind of earned that title. I will also add, because this is kind of more of a traditional way of looking at Saturn, and we can't neglect the traditional way of looking at things, protect your health. So Saturn is in a part of the house or a part of your astrology chart that talks about your health, your vitality, this in the sixth sign, or what are called your health signs. And when Saturn is in your sign, sometimes you can feel like your vitality is diminished. So you really want to like take your vitamins, take care of yourself, do everything you can, like get doctor's appointments, just be on top of things, because Saturn is like, that's just like a very traditional way of looking at Saturn in your sign. This isn't related to that point, but I just remember when Saturn was in Scorpio, this was in 2014. It was right after my birthday in November that Saturn passed my sun by transit. And I remember thinking, like, I just had all this anxiety about what that would mean with Saturn in my sign. And I worked hard, because I was just like, oh man, like, just do what Saturn wants. It's a lot easier. So when Saturn got to my sun, I just had this feeling of like Saturn kind of handed me the keys to the car. Like, all right, you've earned the responsibility. So Saturn might just be giving you more and more responsibility during this time. Pisces and Pisces rising. So Aquarius represents the last sign in your chart. It's you when you get to the last sign, when you get to the 12th room, it's a very existential place. It's a very spiritual place, a very sacred place. You cannot go into this place with your ego, because you're entering this time where you have to shed yourself. You have to shed the past. So this is when you're having to almost like look back at the last 30 years, maybe even getting rid of things, maybe even getting rid of things emotionally and spiritually. It's a time of retreat and reflection. Your Jupiter is going to be in there as well, and Jupiter is your ruling planet. So doubly so, except Jupiter will dip into Pisces from May until July of 2021. But you're in this very liminal place in your life. You've got one foot kind of peeking out into the next life at different points in 2021. And Jupiter will go into Pisces for good. And I think it's like December 28th of 2021. So you're in this phase of time where you have to sort of prepare for your next life. And with that, it's like I said, it's a time of reflection, it's a time of retreat, it's a time of trying to ask the big questions. Is there a God? Is there a spirit? Is there source? Like, how do I rely on my intuition? So this is a time where if you're feeling going into it is like, I'm just going to plow forward, I'm just going to do this, I'm going to do that. It's really about surrender. It's really about aligning yourself with something higher. And sometimes when it's something higher, it's not what we want. So this is kind of more of an existential and spiritual point, because I say this as somebody who has 3 planets in the 12th house herself. It's not about what you want when it's the 12th house. So it's about spirituality, it's about spiritual service, it's about spiritual calling, it's about something higher. It's about rediscovering and reconnecting to your soul, to your divinity. Because it's Aquarius, maybe you're kind of getting in touch with these invisible systems and networks that do exist beyond this world. But it is a time where, in a way, you are becoming more Pisces. The 12th sign, the 12th room is Pisces's natural domain. So you're going to be in a time that in a deep cellular way feels very familiar. Excuse me. So this is a time that is about letting go. This is a time that's like pregnancy, like spiritual pregnancy, and then preparing for the next chapter. So now it's time for questions. I'm going to turn off the screen share, although I will put this up for those that are watching the replay. I do have other webinars that I did throughout last year. You can learn more about astrology. I am going to do a webinar on the astrology 2021. I'm going to do it in January. I thought I had a date picked, but I'm going to have to repick the date. So let me just stop the screen share and see if there's any questions. You can put them in the chat. If anything wasn't clear about what's going on in your sign, thank you all for nevertheless watching and listening. I've been anticipating Saturn in Aquarius because I think it's been really difficult with Saturn in Capricorn and with Pluto and Jupiter. And that's really a lot of the intense astrology that we were experiencing over the last few years. Barbara says, this is amazing. Thank you so much, Barbara. I'm sorry, my voice is kind of crazy. Maybe this is Saturn going into my third room, my room of communication and voice. But, Saturn's no joke, even though I'm a huge fan of Saturn. But like I said, I love Saturn because it just really, plays out the master plan. And if we just do what Saturn needs and Saturn wants, we can create really powerful structures and really powerful things in our life. So this has been your look at Saturn in Aquarius 2020 to 2023. If you have any questions, of course, you can shoot me an email. I will do my best to get back to you. It's kind of a crazy time. Unless you have any other questions, I really thank you all for spending your Saturday or even getting up really early. I know some of you registered who were in Australia. I know it was quite early. Nevertheless, I hope you all really kind of got something about what Saturn means for you, what are some of the key points in 2021 and key points with Saturn in Aquarius. And until then, do enjoy if you're watching the replay. Thank you very much. I always love talking astrology with you all. So have a wonderful day, wonderful evening, and take care. Bye.